Imagine arriving on a tropical island and realizing that something is missing. Not the beaches, not the palm trees, not the turquoise water. Something much more ordinary. Cars. There are roads. There are houses. There are shops. There are hotels. There are thousands of people visiting every year. And yet, the sound you hear most often isn't an engine. It's a bicycle bell. Because on this island, bicycles have become part of the landscape itself. People ride them to work. Visitors ride them to the beach. Children ride them through the village. And for generations, another unusual form of transport has shared the roads with them, the ox cart. This is La Digue, one of the most famous islands in Seychelles, and yet, in some ways, one of the strangest, because La Digue is not simply a beautiful tropical island. It is an island trying to answer a very modern question. How do you keep a small island feeling like a small island when more and more people want to visit it? And right now, that question has become more important than ever. The government is reviewing how many vehicles, visitors, and new developments the island can handle without changing the character that made it famous. And that means the La Digue you see today may not be the La Digue that exists 10 years from now. But before we get to that, we need to understand why this island became so different in the first place. Because the strangest thing about La Digue isn't what you see, it's what you don't hear. La Digue is part of the Seychelles archipelago in the western Indian Ocean. It sits roughly 50 kilometers from the main island of Mahé, and only a few kilometers from Praslin. On a map, that doesn't sound especially remote. And because Seychelles is one of the world's famous tropical destinations, you might expect La Digue to look like a typical resort island. Busy roads, cars everywhere, large hotels, taxis, traffic, the usual signs of modern tourism. But La Digue developed differently. A dramatic granite ridge dominates much of the island. Forests climb its slopes. The coast opens toward beaches, reefs, and enormous granite boulders. And around the settlements, the pace changes completely. Small roads, palm trees, Creole houses, people walking, bicycles, ox carts, and a surprisingly quiet atmosphere. The Seychelles government describes La Digue as an island known for its tranquility and slower pace of life, with bicycles and ox carts remaining important ways of getting around. That phrase, slow pace of life, sounds like something you might find in a tourism advertisement. But on La Digue, it's actually part of everyday life. And that's what makes this island worth exploring. Imagine waking up here on an ordinary morning. Not a perfect sunrise, not a postcard, just another weekday. You step outside. Someone is already riding a bicycle down the road. Another person is walking. A worker is heading somewhere. A delivery vehicle passes. A visitor cycles toward the beach. And somewhere nearby, an ox cart moves slowly through the same streets. In almost any major tourist destination, that scene would look strange. Here, it's normal, and that tells us something important. The unusual isn't separated from everyday life. The unusual is everyday life. But before bicycles became one of La Digue's defining symbols, there was a completely different island, one shaped by agriculture, fishing, boat building, coconut, vanilla, and a much smaller local economy. La Digue was named after a French expedition in the 18th century. Over the decades that followed, people developed livelihoods around the land and sea. Crops were grown, coconuts were processed, boats were built, fish were caught, families established themselves. The island developed its own Creole identity, and for much of its history, Life moved at a pace determined by the environment, not by traffic lights, not by commuter schedules, not by highways. That legacy matters because La Digue's transport culture didn't appear simply because someone decided bicycles looked nice in tourist photographs. It grew out of the island itself. The island was small, distances were manageable, the roads were limited, and a bicycle was enough. Today, bicycles are so closely associated with La Digue that they almost feel like part of the island's architecture. But there's an important distinction. La Digue isn't completely car-free. There are vehicles, there are taxis, there are trucks, there are construction vehicles, there are electric buggies, there are private vehicles. So this isn't a story about a place where cars are forbidden altogether. The real story is much more interesting. It is about an island where the car never became the dominant way of life. And now, that balance is being tested because La Digue isn't just a quiet island anymore. It is a global tourist destination, and tourism changes places. At first, a few visitors arrive. Then more guest houses open, then restaurants, then bike rentals, then tour operators, then more boats, more supplies, more workers, more visitors, and eventually, the island begins facing a strange problem. The very thing people come here to experience can be damaged by too many people experiencing it. It's the tourism paradox. The more successful the destination becomes, the harder it becomes to preserve what made it special. And on a small island, there isn't much room to absorb that pressure. Think about what a tourist actually wants. Easy transport, comfort, restaurants, hotels, activities, fast access to beaches, reliable supplies, modern facilities. But imagine what a local resident needs. A functioning school, a hospital, safe roads, deliveries, construction, waste collection, emergency transport, electricity, water, jobs. These aren't the same priorities, and the island has to serve both groups at the same time. That's where things get complicated, because you can't simply say, keep La Digue exactly as it is. People live here. People need modern services. The population isn't living inside a museum. They have smartphones, internet, modern homes, modern businesses, modern medicine. The question isn't whether La Digue should modernize. It already has. The question is, how much modernization can the island absorb before it loses its character? And that's why transport matters so much. Transportation isn't just about getting from one place to another. It affects everything. How loud the roads are, how crowded they are, how much land must be used for parking, how much fuel needs to be imported, how quickly people move, how safe the streets feel, and even how tourists experience the island. If everyone drives, the island begins to feel like everywhere else. If most people cycle, the island feels different, and that difference has become one of La Digue's biggest attractions. Imagine riding a bicycle down the road here. You're not surrounded by metal and glass. You're exposed to the environment. You feel the heat. You feel the humidity. You hear birds. You smell the sea. You pass people. You see houses. You can stop whenever you want. You can turn down a smaller road. You don't feel separated from the landscape. You're moving through it, and that changes how you perceive distance. A journey of 15 minutes doesn't feel like an inconvenience. It becomes part of the experience. The road itself becomes something you notice. And perhaps that's why the bicycle matters more than people realize. It isn't simply transport. It's part of the rhythm of the island. Then there is the ox cart. For visitors, it can look almost theatrical, a strange reminder of another time. But the tradition is older than tourism. Ox carts were once a practical way of transporting people and goods around the island. Today, they remain one of La Digue's most recognizable symbols. And their survival says something about the island. Modernization didn't completely erase the old ways. Instead, different eras started existing side by side. Ox carts, bicycles, boats, trucks, electric buggies, smartphones, hotels, traditional Creole culture. Everything is layered together. La Digue isn't trapped in the past. It's a place where different versions of the future are competing for space. And that competition is becoming more obvious. Electric vehicles are increasing. Electric bicycles are becoming more common. Visitors expect convenience. Businesses need transportation. And the government is now trying to work out how much of that growth the island can handle. In August 2026, Seychelles suspended new applications for additional buggies and electric vehicles on La Digue while it studies the island's carrying capacity. The assessment is intended to look at transport, tourism, and future development. Seychelles News Agency.com. That means something unusual is happening. The government isn't simply asking, how do we move people around? It's asking, how much movement can this island handle? That's a very different question. And it matters because La Digue is physically small. There is no endless supply of land, no giant mainland behind it, no extra space where the traffic can simply spread. The island is surrounded by ocean. Mountains occupy part of its interior. Forests occupy another part. Coastline is limited. Roads are limited. Parking space is limited. Everything has a physical ceiling, and tourism has a habit of pushing towards ceilings. More rooms, more restaurants, more vehicles, more visitors, more demand. On a huge country, that growth can spread outward. On La Digue, the boundaries are visible. This is why the carrying capacity debate is so important. Tourism Seychelles has been working on visitor use management because rising visitor numbers create pressure on infrastructure, natural sites, and the quality of the visitor experience. And that raises an uncomfortable question. How many tourists can a tiny island absorb before the experience changes? There is no magic number, but there is a point where the island stops feeling peaceful. A point where a quiet road becomes crowded. Where bicycles begin competing with buggies, where a beach becomes a queue, where local residents start feeling like visitors in their own home. That is the line La Digue is trying to find, and there is perhaps no better example than the island's famous beaches. Take the granite boulders scattered along the coast. They look almost unreal. Huge smooth stones, white sand, turquoise water, palm trees. It's the kind of landscape that turns into a screensaver. But places that become famous through photographs often attract more people. More people mean more infrastructure. More infrastructure means more change. And eventually, the question becomes, how do you protect a place from the success of its own image? That's not unique to Seychelles. It's happening everywhere. Venice, Santorini, Bali, Iceland, the Maldives, cities, islands, mountains, entire countries. The internet turns beautiful places into products. And once enough people want the same photograph, the place itself changes. La Digue is simply experiencing this process on a smaller scale. And because it is small, the consequences are harder to hide. But there is something else that makes La Digue interesting. The island isn't only trying to preserve beaches. It is trying to preserve a way of life. The Creole culture, the local community, traditional food, boat building, fishing, the ox carts, the bicycles, the feeling that the island moves at a slower pace. These things are connected. Change one, and eventually you change the others. Introduce more traffic, and the roads become different. Change the roads, and the village changes. Change the village, and the culture changes. This is why transportation can become a cultural issue. For a tourist, a bicycle is an activity. For a resident, it's a means of getting to work. That's a huge difference. Visitors can decide whether they feel like cycling today. Residents can't. They need to get somewhere. They need to carry things. They have jobs. Children have school. Businesses need supplies. Someone has to repair the roof. Someone has to transport equipment. Someone has to take a sick person to medical care. So the question isn't, are bicycles romantic? The question is, can bicycles and modern infrastructure continue to work together? And that is much harder. This is where La Digue stops being simply a beautiful travel destination and becomes a living experiment. How much convenience do people actually need? How much traffic is enough? How much tourism is enough? How much development is enough? And how much of the old way of doing things is worth protecting? There are no easy answers, because every solution creates another problem. More electric vehicles can reduce some environmental impacts, but they can still add traffic. More hotels create jobs, but also increase demand on infrastructure. More tourists bring money, but also create congestion. Better roads improve safety, but may change the character of those roads. Everything has a trade-off, and perhaps that's why the bicycle is such an interesting symbol. It's not perfect, it's not practical for everything, but it fits the island, it fits its scale. It requires very little infrastructure. It doesn't dominate the street, and most importantly, it has become part of the island's identity. When you see a bicycle on La Digue, you're not just seeing transportation. You're seeing a decision about what kind of place this is. Now imagine La Digue 20 years from now. Picture the same road, but instead of bicycles, imagine dozens of electric buggies. More traffic, more parking, more deliveries, more visitors. Maybe the island becomes safer. Maybe it becomes easier to move around. Maybe residents have better access to modern services. Maybe it's more sustainable in some ways. But what happens to the atmosphere? What happens to the feeling? What happens to the experience of moving slowly through the island? And perhaps most importantly, what happens to the reason people wanted to come here in the first place? Now imagine the opposite. Suppose the government limits vehicles strongly. The island remains quiet. Bicycles stay dominant. The roads remain peaceful. Tourism is carefully managed. But now, businesses have to deal with more restrictions. Residents may have fewer transport options. Deliveries may be more difficult. Construction becomes harder. Modernization slows down. That creates another question. Who gets to choose? The tourists? The government? The businesses? Or the people who actually live here? That question matters because La Digue is not a theme park. There are real people here. There are schools, a hospital, police, businesses, families, children, workers, people who wake up every morning and don't see the island as an exotic destination. It's simply home, and that's the perspective tourists can easily miss. A bicycle ride through paradise can be beautiful when you're on vacation, but if it's your only realistic way to reach work, it's a completely different experience. And yet, there is something remarkable about a community where that way of life still works. The island proves that modern living doesn't have to mean identical living. You can have internet, electricity, schools, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, modern homes, and still move around mainly by bicycle. That combination is unusual. And it tells us something important about how places evolve. They don't always replace one system with another. Sometimes they stack them together. The old doesn't disappear. The new simply arrives beside it. That's why the ox cart still matters. That's why the bicycle still matters. That's why electric vehicles matter. That's why this debate is happening. Because La Digue is not deciding between yesterday and tomorrow. It's deciding how much of tomorrow it wants today. And this is where the island's natural environment becomes part of the conversation. La Digue is not just beautiful. It has habitats that are valuable and fragile. The Seychelles paradise flycatcher is strongly associated with the island. Forests and coastal ecosystems support wildlife. The giant granite landscapes are part of the island's geological identity. And the tourism economy depends heavily on these natural assets. That creates another paradox. Tourism needs the environment, but tourism can also put pressure on it. So the island is constantly balancing. Protect the place against profit from the place. And again, there is no perfect solution. The same is true for water, energy, waste, construction, transport. Every system on a small island has limits. And once you realize that, you start looking at La Digue differently. The bicycle is no longer just a charming detail. The small roads aren't just picturesque. The compact village isn't just beautiful. They're all part of a system that evolved around physical limits. And those limits are precisely what make La Digue interesting. There is another reason people love cycling here. It changes the tourist experience. When you rent a car, you tend to move between destinations. Hotel, beach, restaurant, hotel. But on a bicycle, you become part of the space between them. You see houses, you see people, you pass small shops, you smell food, you notice weather. You stop because you want to, not because traffic forces you to. The journey becomes part of the destination, and that may be La Digue's greatest advantage. But as tourism grows, the island risks losing exactly that feeling. If the roads become crowded, the bicycle experience changes. If more electric buggies appear, the quiet changes. If more construction happens, the landscape changes. If more visitors arrive, the beaches change. And once these things change, they're difficult to reverse. That's why the decisions being made right now matter. As of 2026, the Seychelles government is not simply letting that future happen automatically. It's studying it, consulting residents, reviewing transport, thinking about carrying capacity, and trying to decide where the line should be drawn. This is not a final answer. It's a process, and that's important because La Digue's future is still uncertain. Maybe the island finds a balance. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it becomes a model for sustainable island tourism. Maybe it becomes a warning. We don't know yet, but perhaps we can understand the dilemma by asking a simpler question. Imagine you live on La Digue. Would you rather have a faster way to get around, or a quieter island, a better transport system, or fewer vehicles, more visitors, or fewer crowds, more development, or more space, more convenience, or a slower way of life? Most people would probably answer both. And that's exactly the problem. Small islands rarely have unlimited space for both. Maybe that's why La Digue is so fascinating. It's small enough for every decision to matter. One road, one new business, one new vehicle, one new hotel, one new group of visitors. Nothing disappears into a giant city. Everything is visible. Everything affects something else. And that makes the island feel almost like a miniature version of the problems the entire world is dealing with. How do you grow? without destroying what you value. And that brings us back to the bicycle. A bicycle is simple: no fuel, no engine, very little infrastructure, human-powered, slow, efficient. It fits a small island, but it also requires something modern life often forgets: patience. You can't cross the island at highway speed. You have to accept the distance. You have to slow down. You have to coexist with other people. And maybe that's exactly why the bicycle has become so powerful here. Not because it is the fastest, because it is the right speed. Imagine a world where every journey had to be slower. Would that really be a problem? Maybe you'd arrive later, but perhaps you'd notice more. You'd speak to more people. You'd see more. You'd hear less noise. You'd spend more time outdoors. The destination might become less important because the journey itself would matter. That's the experience Digue accidentally created. A place where transportation became part of the identity. But the modern world doesn't always reward slow. Tourists have schedules. Businesses have deliveries. Hotels have check-in times. Restaurants need supplies. Workers need to get home. Technology moves quickly. Expectations move quickly. And eventually, those two speeds collide. The slow island and the fast world arriving on it. Maybe the future won't be bicycles versus cars. Maybe it will be bicycles plus carefully managed electric transport. Maybe taxis will become cleaner. Maybe vehicles will be limited. Maybe visitors will be controlled more carefully. Maybe the island will develop a new system entirely. The important thing is that Digue is thinking about the problem before it becomes impossible to solve. And that gives the island something many other destinations don't have. A chance to decide what it wants to become. And perhaps that is the real story. Not that Digue doesn't have cars. It does. Not that everyone rides bicycles. They don't. Not that the island is untouched. It isn't. The real story is that Digue still has a choice. It can decide how much of the modern world it wants and how much it wants to keep at the door. That decision might sound small, but imagine how different our own cities would feel if they had made the same choice. Imagine if bicycles had remained the dominant form of transport. Imagine if roads had been designed around people instead of cars. Imagine if businesses had evolved around slower movement. Imagine if the sound of an engine was unusual rather than constant. Digue gives us a glimpse of that alternative. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to make you notice. And once you notice, you begin to understand why people come here. The beaches are spectacular. The granite is spectacular. The ocean is spectacular. But those things exist in other places too. What Digue offers that is harder to copy is the feeling, a feeling created by millions of small decisions. Ride instead of drive. Walk instead of rush. Use the boat. Use the bicycle. Keep the ox cart. Build carefully. Develop slowly. And leave some space between things. Of course, those choices have a cost. Nothing is free. Slow transportation takes time. Limited vehicles reduce convenience. Strict development limits can reduce economic opportunities. Managing tourism can mean saying no to money. Preserving culture can mean resisting change. And eventually, someone has to decide which costs are worth paying. Perhaps that is why Digue's current transport debate matters so much. It isn't really about bicycles. It's about identity. If Digue becomes more efficient, will it still feel like Digue? If it becomes easier to move around, will the island lose something? If tourism doubles, does the island become twice as successful? Or does it become twice as crowded? These are not questions a spreadsheet can answer completely. Some things are measurable. Others are not. You can count visitors. You can count vehicles. You can count hotel rooms. But how do you measure the feeling of a quiet street? How do you measure the value of hearing a bicycle instead of an engine? How do you measure the identity of a place? And maybe that's why this little island is worth paying attention to. Because La Digue is confronting a problem that almost every beautiful place eventually faces. Popularity changes places. Tourism changes places. Technology changes places. But people still want their homes to feel like home. La Digue is simply trying to solve that problem in miniature.